What if I told you that one of Africa's most promising democracies has completely collapsed into chaos in just 5 years? Today we're diving deep into Burkina Faso, a West African nation that's become so dangerous it's earned a level 4 do not travel advisory from the US State Department. This isn't just another troubled country story. This is about how an entire nation can spiral from democratic hope to jihadist nightmare faster than anyone thought possible. Burkina Faso sits in the heart of West Africa's Sahel region, landlocked between Mali, Niger, Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. With over 22 million people crammed into a territory roughly the size of Colorado, this former French colony has become ground zero for one of the world's most devastating security crises. The country that once prided itself on relatively stable governance now faces an insurgency so brutal that over 2 million people have fled their homes. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 2014. For 27 years, Burkina Faso was ruled by Blaise Compaoré, a military strongman who seized power in a 1987 coup that killed his predecessor and former friend Thomas Sankara. Sankara, known as Africa's Che Guevara, had implemented radical socialist policies and anti-corruption measures that made him beloved by many ordinary Burkina but dangerous to regional and international interests. When Compaoré tried to extend his rule by changing the constitution in October 2014, something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of thousands of citizens poured into the streets of Ouagadougou, the capital. They burned the parliament building and forced Compaoré to flee to Ivory Coast. This was supposed to be Burkina Faso's democratic breakthrough moment. The euphoria was infectious. Here was proof that African peoples could peacefully remove dictators and demand better governance. The transition period was rocky but promising. In November 2015, Marc Christian Compaoré won the presidency in what international observers called free and fair elections. The former banker promised to tackle corruption, improve security, and modernize the economy. For a brief moment, Burkina Faso looked like a success story. But while politicians celebrated in Ouagadougou, something sinister was growing in the northern provinces. Jihadist groups that had been operating in neighboring Mali began crossing the porous borders. The most significant of these was Jamaat Nasser al-Islam wal Muslimin, known as JIM, an al-Qaeda affiliate formed in 2017 through the merger of several smaller groups. The first major attack came in January 2016 at the Splendido Hotel in Ouagadougou. Gunmen stormed a luxury hotel and nearby cafe, killing 30 people including 6 Canadians and several French citizens. This wasn't random violence. It was a calculated message that nowhere in Burkina Faso was safe, not even the heart of the capital where expatriates and government officials gathered. JIM wasn't alone. Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, known as ISGS, also established a presence in Burkina Faso's eastern regions. These groups exploited ethnic tensions, recruited from marginalized communities, and capitalized on weak state presence in rural areas. They offered protection and justice to communities that felt abandoned by the central government. The security situation deteriorated rapidly. In 2017, there were fewer than 20 terrorist attacks recorded. By 2019, that number had exploded to over 200. The violence followed a predictable pattern. Militants would attack military outposts, police stations, and schools. They would kidnap teachers, health workers, and government officials. They would impose harsh interpretations of Islamic law in areas they controlled. President Compaoré struggled to respond effectively. The Burkina military, trained for conventional warfare, proved ill-equipped to fight an insurgency. Soldiers were poorly equipped, inadequately trained for counterinsurgency operations, and often found themselves outgunned by militants using sophisticated weapons looted from Libya after Gaddafi's fall. International assistance arrived but proved insufficient. France launched Operation Barkhane in 2014 to combat terrorism across the Sahel, with about 5,000 troops deployed across the region. The United Nations established a peacekeeping mission in Mali called MINUSMA. The African Union and Economic Community of West African States created the G5 Sahel Force. Despite these efforts, the security crisis only worsened. By 2020, over 1 million Burkinab had been displaced from their homes. Schools across the north and east closed as teachers fled or were killed. Health clinics shuttered. Local markets emptied. Entire villages were abandoned as residents fled to government-controlled areas or neighboring countries. The breaking point came in 2021. A series of devastating attacks pushed public frustration to a boiling point. In June, militants killed over 100 civilians in Solhin village in the deadliest attack in the country's history. In November, a convoy carrying supplies to northern towns was ambushed, killing 53 military police officers. These attacks exposed the government's complete inability to protect its citizens. On January 24, 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba led a military coup that overthrew President Compaoré. The coup leader cited deteriorating security and Compaoré's inability to address the crisis as justification. They promised to restore order and defeat terrorism within 2 years. Damiba's government made initial progress, launching more aggressive military operations and reaching out to civilian self-defense groups. However, attacks continued. In September 2022, another devastating assault on a military convoy near the town of Gascond killed over 30 soldiers and wounded dozens more. This failure triggered a second coup. On September 30, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old, seized power from Damiba. Traoré accused his predecessor of failing to break with the policies that had led to the security crisis. He promised a more aggressive approach to fighting terrorism and reducing foreign influence. Under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso has taken several dramatic steps. In February 2023, the government ordered French forces to leave the country, ending a decade of military cooperation. This decision reflected growing anti-French sentiment and skepticism about foreign military assistance. Traoré has instead sought closer ties with Russia, following the model of neighboring Mali and Niger. The current situation remains dire. As of 2024, terrorist groups control approximately 40% of Burkina Faso's territory, primarily in the northern and eastern regions. Over 6,000 people have been killed since the insurgency began, and over 2 million remain displaced. The humanitarian crisis is catastrophic, with over 4 million people requiring assistance. The economy has collapsed in many regions. Agricultural production has plummeted as farmers abandon their fields. Mining operations, crucial for government revenue, have been repeatedly attacked. Foreign investment has virtually disappeared. Even the capital Ouagadougou experiences regular security alerts and occasional attacks. This security collapse has regional implications. The crisis has spread to northern Benin, Togo, and Ivory Coast as militants cross borders. It has contributed to instability in Ghana's northern regions. The entire West African Sahel is now a corridor of insecurity stretching from Mauritania to Chad. The international response has evolved but remains inadequate. The European Union has suspended aid programs. The United States maintains a Level 4 travel advisory, the highest warning level, advising Americans not to travel to Burkina Faso under any circumstances. Even humanitarian organizations have scaled back operations due to security constraints. Several factors explain why Burkina Faso has been particularly vulnerable. The country is extremely poor, ranking among the bottom 10 countries on the UN Human Development Index. Ethnic tensions between farming and herding communities have been exploited by extremist groups. Corruption has undermined state institutions and military effectiveness. The government's current strategy focuses on military solutions and reducing foreign dependence. Traoré has recruited thousands of new soldiers and expanded civilian self-defense groups called Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland. However, military approaches alone cannot address the underlying grievances that fuel extremism. Looking ahead, Burkina Faso faces enormous challenges. The government must simultaneously fight an insurgency, address humanitarian needs, restore basic services, and rebuild state legitimacy. Success requires not just military victories but also political inclusion, economic development, and reconciliation between communities. The international community watches nervously as Burkina Faso represents a test case for counterterrorism strategies in Africa. If the current approach fails, it could accelerate the spread of extremism across West Africa. If it succeeds, it might offer lessons for other countries facing similar challenges. What makes Burkina Faso's crisis particularly tragic is how preventable it was. This wasn't an inevitable result of poverty or ethnic conflict. It was the consequence of weak governance, inadequate security responses, and international strategies that prioritized short-term stability over long-term development. Countries with do not travel advisories in 2026 like Burkina Faso remind us that state collapse can happen faster than anyone expects. They show how quickly hope can turn to despair when institutions fail and extremism fills the vacuum. If you found this deep dive into Burkina Faso's crisis informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more detailed explorations of global events and discoveries. Understanding these complex situations is crucial for making sense of our interconnected world, and your engagement helps us continue bringing you this essential content.